America has taken this reckless gamble and stumbled and messed everything up in the Gulf. The whole region is rewiring itself politically and economically. And in fact, it's working around the Strait of Hormuz, isn't it?
Iran, which was supposed to be pummeled, decapitated, humiliated, facing civilizational extinction, has got lots of different options. So you're left with this appalling status quo, with the price of oil at $120 a barrel. This is terrible news for economies like ours. Hello and welcome to the Forecast Indicators with me, Matt Frei.
And me, Mark Urban. And on Forecast Indicators, we look at the signals analysts watch out for most closely, separate the wheat from the chaff, the signal from the noise, the telltale signs that suggest imminent and significant change may be coming.
A very good reason to watch. Well, this week we're going to talk oil cartels, Trump truths, and drones. Always drones. So, Mark, what is your first indicator?
Well, look, the first one, and I think this speaks to the sense in which nothing will ever be the same in the Gulf after this war, is the United Arab Emirates, fourth biggest oil producer, et cetera, hugely wealthy, leaving the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and hinting that it may be reconsidering its other memberships of multilateral organizations, possibly even including the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the defense arrangement among the Gulf states. Now, I think this is really significant because it speaks to the question of tensions that have emerged between the Gulf states as a result of Iran malleting them with ballistic missiles, drones, and all the rest of it. Tensions that we know, of course, were already there between the UAE and Saudi, but have now really intensified, and possibly of new strategic alignments, new friendships, and new arrangements. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, until all this happened on the 28th of February, the Americans were very much the kingpins of security in the Gulf. And now, it's quite clear the UAE and some of the others who are disappointed that the Americans got them into this when they said, don't do it. They weren't listened to. And now there's every prospect that America might walk away, which we'll look at in a moment from this war, leaving them with their nightmare neighbors in Iran left, as it were, trying to find some kind of new security arrangements. And
I mean, there's also a little bit of beef, isn't there? Well, quite a lot of beef between Saudi and UAE in Yemen, where they're both backing rival factions in the Yemeni sort of ongoing, burbling civil war. But what was also really interesting, another kind of indicator, was that was it yesterday? The UAE suddenly decided to demand, was it 3.5 billion US dollars, which they had loaned to Pakistan, back immediately. Now, why would they do that to Pakistan?
Well,
why treat the Pakistanis like this? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Pakistan's been on a bit of a journey.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That is another key one that we've seen this week. And that relates to what I just said about new arrangements or new alignments. So we knew that Pakistan was very solid with Saudi Arabia, for example, long history of defense engagement. And indeed, they're said to have sent troops and fighter jets. They made a defense deal with them last
2023, I think.
Last autumn, I think it was. And so when Iran attacks Saudi Arabia, you expect them to come in swinging on the side of Saudi Arabia. Well, not only did they not do that, but they're acting as an intermediary. And they're now, we hear, allowing Iranian goods to come through Pakistani ports, which in some way undermines the idea of a blockade. Now, obviously, the UAE are absolutely appalled by this. Hence, they've asked for their money back, as you very rightly pointed out. And we see other things apparently emerging or seem to be emerging. So some people now talk about a strategic alignment between Israel, the UAE, and India. Now, obviously, India, and any group that Pakistan is in, they're going to want to be on the other side.
But also, the obvious point here again, and it's worth stressing it every single time. What happened on the 28th of February was supposed to be over within days. It was supposed to decapitate a regime and replace it with something else, perhaps from the people in Iran. And instead, by kicking the hornet's nest, those hornets have been flying everywhere and setting up new allegiances, breaking off old ones, and rearranging the geopolitical map of the Middle East in ways that we could really not have foretold. So Pakistan for me is fascinating. And I've been speaking to a couple of people about this country this week, and they all agree because it has this, it's like an octopus, with tentacles just about everywhere. So remember Pakistan in 2011 when Osama bin Laden was killed. He was found in Pakistan. It was not just a pariah state with a terrible human rights record. It also had a nuclear weapon, and it was perceived to be almost a failed state. So people were terrified that this failed state could, with its nukes, could end up being a real menace. Now Pakistan is part of the Belt and Road project with China. It's almost a puppet state of Beijing. It's got incredibly close relations with Trump's America. So they nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Others did too, but they were important in that. They were some of the first people to sign up to the Border Peace. They also invested in Trump's crypto exchange. Asim Munir, the de facto military leader of Pakistan, is close to Zach Witkoff, Steve Witkoff's son, Steve Witkoff being the envoy. And Zach persuaded Dad to basically take Pakistan seriously as an intermediary. So the Pakistanis are in a very, very strong position. This, of course, has upset India. India is upset with America. Trump is upset with Delhi because they were buying sanctioned Russian oil when there shouldn't have been, which is rather ironic because those sanctions have been lifted anyway. But out of all this, Pakistan emerges, for now at least, in a linchpin position.
Yes.
The question is, and I wonder what you think, can they convert this into genuine currency? Because they need those peace talks to carry on and to bear fruit. And at least they got them to talk to each other directly for the first time at that level in 47 years, Iran and America. But they need to bear fruit, and they haven't done so far. And that gets us to the next problem, which is Iran. Right. So what's Iran's game in this?
Yeah, let's backtrack one step there to the points you're quite rightly making about Pakistan and its diplomatic opportunism.
I'm glad you agree with me.
This clearly appalls the Emiratis, hence them recalling the money. Lo and behold, Saudi Arabia instantly stumps up and says, don't worry, Pakistan, we'll replace the money. And there you see something which I think at the sort of subtext level or the covert level of what's going on is really interesting. Why isn't Saudi Arabia angrier with Pakistan? They're facilitating Iranian exports and imports. They're acting as an intermediary when they're supposed to be on Saudi Arabia's side through this defense pact. And one there detects the idea that there's a bit of an arrangement that through the Pakistani mediation, the Saudis know that they can keep exporting oil through their Red Sea route. There can be an understanding. They won't attack Iran. They won't join the war against Iran. And that is doubly infuriating for the Emiratis because, they're leaving OPEC is all about, in the longer term, them pumping more oil, selling more oil. It's
about reducing caps, deciding yourself how much oil you want to produce.
So there's all of that. And so, yes, so people talk about the historic grievance between the Emiratis and the Saudis. But the Pakistan relationship with the US, with the Saudis, and then with the Iranians, absolutely fascinating. And yeah, I mean, look, the Iranians, I think quite a lot of analytical opinion now suggests that the blockade is causing a bit of a pinch. I mean, what else is Araghchi doing jetting around the region and to Moscow?
You're talking about the American blockade here.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
What is the Iranian foreign minister doing if not trying to ease that pressure point somewhat? And of course, that's what they've said, is that first on the agenda is stopping the blockade, reopening Hormuz, not the nuclear issue. That's the Iranian line. Now, some of the analytical opinion, if you look at people who literally look at the satellite photos of old rusty Iranian tankers, have noticed that some of them have been moved up to Kharg Island to be used as floating storage pontoons because they are getting closer and closer to the point where all their storage is full. They have to stop pumping. So the Iranian mines, I think, are concentrated. The question is, can they get via the Pakistani channel a lifting of the American blockade while at the same time keeping their own toll booth arrangement going? Very unacceptable to Trump, I think.
Indeed. And there are sort of ironies within ironies. So if you look at the map, imagine the map. So you've got the American blockade that goes from the tip of Oman across the the wider opening of the Strait of Hormuz, to almost where Iran meets Pakistan. A little bit further down the coast on Pakistan is the port of Gwadar. Now, apparently this port, which is a key port for Pakistan, has had, again, according to intelligence reports, 24/7 activity. They're widening the port. They're making it bigger. Maybe they're even preparing it for oil exports. But this is, of course, crucial for the Iranians. They ship their stuff across the land border to Pakistan. They go to the port of Gwadar. From there, it can sail to China or vice versa. Or they can just take the land route, which is more difficult, I suspect, because you have to go through the Himalayas and Tibet and so on. Right? Bit of a detour. And I'm not even sure what the Belt and Road project has managed to create there in terms of road links and rail links. But again, the bigger picture is that Iran, which was supposed to be pummeled, decapitated, humiliated, facing civilizational extinction, has got, well, first of all, hung on rather longer than everyone thought, has weaponized the strait very effectively, has got time on its side, or it thinks it does, and has got lots of different options. Options with the Pakistanis, options with the Chinese. This is interesting. This is not what the script said.
No, absolutely. Happen. And I think if viewers or listeners are slightly head swimming at all the power, political and economic combinations we're talking about, I think one way of looking at it is the whole region is rewiring itself politically and economically. And in fact, it's working around the Strait of Hormuz, isn't it? Because that Pakistani port you mentioned is a way for Iran to get its imports in and perhaps tankers out through Pakistani coastal waters. And similarly, the whole play now with the Emiratis implicitly is, well, we can pump oil across the United Arab Emirates to the port of Fujairah, which is outside the Gulf, beyond the Strait of Hormuz. And when this all settles, we can increase production and increase the flow of that pipeline. And that is all about rewiring. And some people in the Gulf, like the Emiratis, saying, no way are we paying to use the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians preparing themselves for the possibility that Trump does just walk away and they haven't got the blockade lifted. So they have to use a Pakistani port or some other method of trying to get around it.
So everyone is doing different workarounds and trying out different options because they have to, right? And on the same level, Europeans are busy exporting more gas and oil from the United States. In Houston, Texas, their hats are getting bigger and bigger with their wallets. But the Trump administration doesn't seem to have that many options. I mean, that's the rather odd thing here.
Yeah, let me ask you one, which is Reuters have had reporting this week on this possibility that Trump may just walk away, that they may just sort of say, well, call us when you're interested. How likely do you think that is?
Well, does Trump need the strait to be opened? He doesn't really. I mean, it's bad for the price of petrol and the price of gas because that's set in the international market. I don't know what options there would be for him to just say, we are not only energy self-sufficient in the US, we're also the biggest exporter of carbon energy. So why don't we just do our own thing here and cap the price or set the price artificially for our consumers who are also voters in the midterm elections? Because domestically, this is really hurting him, right? But strategically, he doesn't need the strait to be open nearly as much as the Asians do. Or actually the Europeans, because of course the Chinese have got their own workaround because they've got to deal with Iran. There's the potential land route, which helps, as we just discussed. I think the Europeans are, in a very difficult place here. And of course, Trump is saying, well, Europe, you should step up and send those boats.
But just coming back to Trump, Matt, and the reporting that he's suggesting everybody needs to prepare for an extended. How does that play domestically?
In America?
The US continuing with the blockade and the fleet and everything being deployed there. Is that acceptable?
I think, to be honest, I think the public will get as bored as Trump has already got with this war. And Trump, as we know, is all about the attentional economy. He wants us to focus on the next thing. Perhaps he'll distract everyone by finally mobilizing Marco Rubio. Who's Marco Rubio, by the way? America's senior diplomat. He's gone into a witness protection program over this whole war. Whether it's a smart move or not, we'll decide. But maybe he'll be mobilized, to give Cuba a go, whatever. But I think as long as Trump doesn't commit the ultimate strategic mistake of sending thousands of boots into Iran. And despite the fact that there's been a buildup, of military power, which we discussed a few weeks ago, all the people who know more about this than I do on the military side are saying to me, this is not enough.
No, it's not an invasion.
Right. So I don't even think, I think even a limited thing, so what's the point of occupying Kharg Island?
No, they haven't got
if you've got a block, an American blockade in the Gulf. Okay, so I think that military option on the ground is gone. So you're back to the kind of permanent threat of war from the air. We know that the Iranians are quite good at resisting that. They can take a few more hits, a few more bridges. And of course, the danger with that is that you then export the war to the rest of the Gulf. And, the Saudis and even the Emiratis and everyone is begging probably the Israelis and the Americans not to resume that. So you're left with this appalling status quo with the price of oil at $120 a barrel. This is terrible news for economies like ours in Britain. It's really bad news for the Germans and the Southeast Asians. And I think Trump can withstand that pain as long as he can somehow find a way of limiting or mitigating the cost to the American consumer ahead of the midterm elections.
Yeah. Have you heard the one going around the dealing rooms? We thought Trump would taco, but in fact it's nacho. Not a chance Hormuz opens is what nacho.
I've not heard that.
Yeah,
that's very good.
That's what nacho stands
for. We're going to run out of Mexican dishes, aren't we, at the end of all this? Yeah.
It could be. Yeah, no, I mean, it seems to me that in the Iranian calculation, and people, I have rightly along with everyone else pointed out from the get-go that their tolerance of pain is higher. The one wrinkle in that, of course, is that the people really feeling the pain on this, whether it's Sri Lanka, the Philippines, the countries that were so dependent on Gulf oil are not America.
Yeah.
There might be the issue of the gas pump price and the global price of energy, but I think Trump has convinced himself that that's something the US benefits from as well.
So I remember going to Sri Lanka a few years ago when they had terrible economic problems. They basically ran out of dollars. They couldn't afford to buy the oil off the tankers that were sitting off the coast of Colombo. And the petrol queues were unbelievable, right? And there was popular unrest. This is Sri Lanka we're talking about. And the president ended up getting deposed. We now have a new government. So this has political consequences in places like Sri Lanka. It could have political consequences elsewhere in Southeast Asia. If the fertilizer doesn't come, the crops fail. We've discussed this before. I don't think Trump, that enters into his imagination, and I don't think he frankly cares very much. But they will care. And so I think, here we are talking at the beginning of the podcast about all the unintended consequences, and this war's really good at unintended consequences. UAE opting out of OPEC, etc. Those consequences will accelerate the longer the strait stays closed in a number of countries that we haven't even mentioned yet. The known unknowns of this war.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that could become deeply, destabilizing and alarming, and let's see.
And of course, an America first America isn't too bothered by that in broad terms. I mean, one of the areas where the conflict is still active, and clearly the Iranians do care about it, and so do the Americans, is Lebanon, of course, with the Israeli fight with Hezbollah. And there was a supposed renewal of the ceasefire, but as we know, it's frayed. The Israelis have been bombing, Hezbollah's been attacking them. It is fraying, and that's one of the kind of untidy elements of this, if this is left unresolved and we get a nacho and Trump walks away from the whole thing.
But untidy also because I think if Hezbollah and Israel carry on at it, even if it's sporadic, both sides can torpedo any deal done, if there is a deal, done between US and Iran. So if the Israelis feel that, that Hezbollah has not been sufficiently weakened, and actually taking out Iran's proxies in the region has for them been almost as important a goal in this war as stopping nuclear enrichment and the missile program. But if Hezbollah still has a pulse and they can still fire missiles into northern Israel, and the Israelis will then, of course, respond, this is a hair trigger that could torpedo, destroy any deal if a deal is done between the United States and Iran.
Yes, although, Trump looks ready to strong-arm Netanyahu.
He's done it. He's done it effectively. But how long does that work?
Viable deal. I mean, the other thing, and here's another indicator for us, right up and down military one, is in the last several days, increasing and effective use by Hezbollah of so-called first-person view drones. Those drones piloted by someone using a VR headset or a cell phone. We've seen them, of course, very extensively used the past couple of years on the Ukrainian battlefield. And they allow the person using it to go through the door of a bunker or into a building.
Where did they get hold of these?
Who, the Hezbollah?
Yeah.
Do you know, the technology is so easily transferable. A lot of the parts are 3D printed. You know, it's an interesting question. I mean, to have the Russians help them, have the Iranians help them. They get access to military technology from Russia and Iran, clearly. Sure. But there have been a couple of incidents. There was a medevac helicopter that was hit a couple of days ago that have really exposed the Israelis and shown how unready they are for this. The Hezbollah have apparently been using the fiber optic guided form of literally a little spool of fiber optic wire comes out the back so you can't jam it.
Right.
And there's a lot of perturbation now, I think, in the Israeli military about what on earth are they going to do? Because when they launched that campaign into southern Lebanon, they had all these ideas about a security zone. And suddenly it looks like holding that security zone could be much more expensive in terms of casualties.
Yeah.
So it's potentially a bit of a game changer, I think, in Lebanon, and leaves Hezbollah potentially in a much stronger position than we thought they might be.
Zooming out to the big question again, I mean, all wars end when either one side is defeated or both sides are exhausted and there's some political settlement at the end. And I just wonder whether the complexity of what Trump's war and Israel's war has unleashed in the region, the fact that so many people, including, as you just cited, Hezbollah, are rather ingeniously and quickly coming up with workarounds, that allows them to continue, whether we will at some stage reach a point of exhaustion or stalemate where everyone just thinks, oh my God, this just can't carry on. We've got to have a comprehensive peace deal for the region, which involves all of the people that we've been talking about. Or are we dealing with such a kind of relatively low level of conflict that it can just go on and on and on, which is a nightmare, not for everyone, but for the people living in northern Israel, for the people living in southern Lebanon, for the Gulf states trying to continue their business model of being, tourist Mecca and a business Mecca in a safe neighborhood, for ordinary people living in Iran or Isfahan. I don't know. What do you think? Are we dealing with a permanent low-level form of war here, or are we reaching a crescendo?
I think potentially it is very hard to get the genie back in the bottle, but I think one has to look at, is it in Iran's interest or indeed Saudi Arabia's or the Emirates or whatever, for this current situation to persist? And I don't think it is. No. And I think that's why we see the Iranian foreign minister flying around. Of course they want it to end. Everyone wants it to end. It's just that Iran
on
now...
these terms.
Yeah, exactly. And
with what
the
face?
Debate...
With what degree of dignity left there?
I think people in the Iranian leadership, particularly from the Revolutionary Guard, the leaders like General Vahidi, the leader of the Revolutionary Guard, have seen the opportunity to bake in something involving Hezbollah in Lebanon, to something involving raising money from the passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. All these things, almost like a sort of panacea for all of Iran's security and economic worries, that, we can do all of this if we play our cards right. And clearly they can't do all of it. Now, I would think it's to Iran's advantage that all of the traffic, including the Saudi tankers and the Qatari and the Kuwaiti ones, all get moving again. Because then if they make this toll booth scheme work, there's a big economic benefit.
Yeah.
But of course...
Maybe with the Americans, as we discussed before. I mean, it gets back again, just briefly, to Asim Munir, the de facto leader of Pakistan, who was in Tehran for 2 days last week. I mean, he actually visited Tehran. He went along, and while he was there, he was constantly on the phone to a guy called Donald Trump in Washington. Now, this is fascinating. So maybe the Pakistanis are the people, the midwives of this new order in the Middle East, however messy it might look at the moment. Or maybe not. But I just think the fundamental point, and you refer to it, is that both Iran and the United States and everyone else wants this thing to stop. And if they can find the famous off-ramp that or do a deal, which may not be perfect, but it's better than nothing. It keeps the Iranians in place. Israel will be unhappy about that, but they may have to live with it because we've seen how Trump can call the shots there. America won't like it, but maybe there's a shred there where he can say it's better than Obama's deal because, I've managed to delay enrichment by 10 years as opposed to just 5 years, whatever. There'll be some fig leaf of a deal that people can proffer. That's the optimistic scenario. I think we should now move on finally to the big diplomatic event of the week, which is, of course, the presence of our king.
HRH.
In Washington.
But I think there is a link because in all the permutations that we've discussed as to how you open up the Strait of Hormuz logjam, or do people just work around it, and what combination of those things is going to happen, Europe and the UK do not figure, do they?
No.
And in that sense, we're bystanders. And even Trump seems to have stopped insulting the Europeans and saying, if you want the oil, go and get it, that type of thing. He doesn't seem to expect any further action. And so now the king has been in Washington trying to mend fences. And as a long-time denizen of that town, Matt, do you regard this as a tour de force, as one of the few things that is left in the British bag of tricks?
So in the case of this speech, I thought this is the most difficult speech of his reign, and it probably was in many ways.
I think that's fair.
And it's going to be very tough. And he's either going to look like a sycophant to Trump, or he's going to have his Love Actually moment, and that'll be the end of any kind of relationship, whether special or not. The speech he delivered in Congress before the joint houses did several things that I thought were impossible in this current American, tribally divided nation, which is it had both Republicans and Democrats on their feet a dozen times applauding. And crucially, even though it was delivered by, the representative of a country that Trump has fallen out with, but also the representative of a country that was once the colonial master, this speech managed to make Americans feel good about themselves, like few other speeches, because it did so in the kind of emollient, nudge, nudge, wink, wink language of royal diplomacy, delivered as only maybe a British monarch can to an American audience.
And I think if we try to be honest about the nature of our relationship, you've got all the soft power, you have got the history. And of course, that's what the king was speaking to this week very successfully. And then you've got these areas which I guess are the sort of legacy of high Cold War integration or cooperation, signals intelligence, the nuclear fleet, the submarine fleet, and one or two other areas like that. And I thought it was rather interesting this week, Ben Judah, who just stopped being a special advisor to the government, used the phrase, the specialist relationship, which I think is quite a good summing up of where it is in real terms
but it's sort of,
at this point.
Yes, but it has a touch of the Betty Ford Clinic about it. You're trying to get yourself off this drug that you've been high on for so many years. I think we should retire anything that starts with SPE forever. Just one final thought. Washington, what the king did was highly entertaining, and I loved it. And
finding the bell from the submarine, Trump, HMS Trump.
Who would have thought? Okay, that's all great. But in the bigger picture, you've got America with this entertaining little sideshow. They've burrowed themselves into a hole over the war that they started. Meanwhile, China, and remember that in the middle of May, Trump will go to Beijing to meet Xi Jinping. And that summit was one of the absolute, that was going to be one of the pillars of his second administration after the trade war that he started and lost. Meanwhile, the Chinese are rearranging the global furniture in a far more complicated and, complex way, to their advantage, whether it's exploiting what's going on in Iran, which should really have harmed them much more than it did, whether it's using Pakistan, whether it's the fact that, on the trade war with America is something that they've done rather well on. They have massive internal issues, and a lot of this is driven by the fact that there's high youth unemployment in China, there's a property bubble, all that stuff. But in terms of strategic thinking, Mark Urban, they are miles ahead of the Americans.
I'm going to put in a final dissenting note here.
How dare you?
Certainly,
we were getting on so nicely.
Last week, absolutely, we said strategic foresight, whether it's the petrol stockpile, whether it's the slow building of relationships. But a couple of discordant points that I've seen come up this week. I mean, firstly, a prominent Emirati pointing out that all the drones that have been hitting them have Chinese components. A lot of people in the Gulf won't forget that. Secondly, the situation...
Just so they won't forget that America basically didn't consult them about the war,
they won't. Absolutely. Hence, they're looking to these new relationships we've been talking about. But I mean, also, it can't be in the Chinese interest that their energy costs that much more. Either the toll booth system or a continued blockade of some kind, that can't be in their long-term interest either. So I think in some respects, there's bad news for them too. But overall, you're right. I mean, in terms of showing up, that America has taken this reckless gamble and stumbled and messed everything up in the Gulf. Of course, China profits from that.
But of course, as Trump told us, the king agreed with him wholeheartedly behind closed doors in the golden cage of the Oval Office about the righteous nature of this war.
No, that Iran shouldn't get the bomb.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Even Putin agrees with that.
Indeed. Goodbye from both of us. See you next time.